Welcome to the Japn podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. In this episode, we continue our discussion of Sudong Chen. We pick up with Su in Japan, and he talks about the differences between training in Japan, sort of with the sport mentality versus Taiwan and the more traditional martial arts. We get into a little discussion about sports versus fighting, as well as sort of what's useful and what's not in traditional martial arts. And in our Patreon episode this week, we begin a series on Zhang Feng. We're going to look at a couple different articles about him from Taiwan Wulin. So this for the first one, which focuses on his life and his second wife, Zhu Baomei, who kind of took over the school after Zhang fell ill. So I hope you enjoy it. Check that out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Today we return to the discussion of Chinese martial arts master Sudong Chen from the Martial Cultivation Journal December 2023 special issue, published by Line of Intent Books. A very interesting and comprehensive look at Sudong Chen's experience and teachings, and mostly about his own masters and his learning years in Taiwan and Japan, and then traveling all over the world, pursuing martial arts. And he's a really interesting character in the world of Kung Fu because of his open-mindedness and a progressive mentality of trying to always drill everything down to its essence and make it not necessarily following tradition, but finding the very best materials and blending it together to make the most efficient, and evolving from what you get to make it better and to suit you better, and in that way make it your own, is part of his philosophy. And so him coming from the school of Tang Shu Dao is what brought us here, because we've been talking a lot about the martial arts of Taiwan and the Tang Shu Dao school as a young man, which is a pretty major accomplishment in a country like Japan, which is very heavily into martial arts and very, shall we say, interested in how good you are. So there's no question people were challenging him and really putting pressure on him if you try to open a school in Japan as a foreigner. So that's a pretty huge accomplishment, and definitely one that must have come with all kinds of twists and turns. And then he mentions working on a part of a right-wing organization as captain of the security force, being a mercenary and bodyguard. He doesn't tell any more stories about that, but I can only imagine that's where some of his rumored street fighting experience must have taken place. But
That sounds intense.
right? I mean, this guy
Pretty
was
young
living.
at that. I mean, this is all before he's like 25, dude.
Yeah. So I guess so much is left to the imagination. I'm sure in person he'd be happy to regale you with tales of his adventures at that age, but we'll just leave that aside. I wanted to pull something from this time period from the book we've been reading, Hung Zihan's Blurred Boundaries, that was just published last year, from the son of Hung Yishang, who we've been reading a lot of stories from there. He has a paragraph here where he mentions Sudong Chen opening the school in Japan. He says that Hung Yishang brought his eldest son and two disciples to Tokyo, including Sudong Chen, one of those disciples, to cut the ribbon on the opening ceremony of the Yizong Tangshudao Budokan Kobukan. So that's the school that Master Hong is opening in Japan, who Sudong Chen is going to be leading. In addition to the official public ceremony and martial arts performances to the media that day, Hung Yishang clearly assigned Sudong Chen to be responsible and promote this gym in the role of chief instructor. The establishment of this Kobukan, the land and the buildings, were entirely sponsored by local entrepreneurs and foundations, but was under the authority and reputation of the main Taiwan school. It was another milestone of internationalization for the Tang Shu Dao system created by Hung Yishang. However, it is a pity that the coaches selected to pass it on were weak. Language barriers could not be overcome, and the succession lacked vitality. A true pity. So I think my interpretation here is he's saying that the school never really flourished, and they trained instructors, but it never really grew beyond the school while Sudong Chen was running it.
Well, yeah, that's what it sounds like. Running a school is difficult, and there's more to it than just being
Right.
able to kick people's asses. It's like you actually have to know how to run a business, and have like a, there's a lot. Yeah, so it's more complicated than I think people think it is. And
Right. I mean, it's kind of a great honor for your teacher to set you up with a school in a foreign country, but making that last long term, I mean, it seems like he pulled it off for about 4 years, it sounds like. So that in itself is a pretty massive accomplishment to keep
especially
the
if
doors
there's
open.
a especially if there's a um, like an expectation that you're turning out other instructors or something, like that's
Right.
that's hard to do in that short amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, it makes the point that you have to be good at martial arts, you have to be a good businessman, and you also have to have good relationships with people and be like an exciting person that people want to be around. Like you got to have at least two of those three if you're going to open a commercial school and run it, And if you're kind of bristly and you don't want to teach children or whatever, okay, well then you better be really good and be a good businessman. But if you're not that great of a fighter, then you better be a good, friendly person and a good businessman. You know what I mean? Like you got to have at least a couple of those different skills to make it happen for long. And even then, you have to have pretty good luck
And
because
I
it
was just
just
gonna say,
takes anything going.
a big part of it's luck. Being in the right place at the right time is a huge part of whether or not it's going to succeed. I mean, as they say, location, 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 right? I mean, you got to be in the
Mm,
right place because you got to be easily accessible. You got to be
hmm.
appealing. This is the marketing side of it. And again, that's
Totally.
why I think one of the reasons probably why it didn't work was Hung Yishang school had sort of a Japanese martial art aesthetic,
Hmm.
which was not unique in Taiwan, but stood out, I think. Where in Japan, if you're trying to teach anything really, but especially trying to teach something Chinese that looks, it's sort of packaged in a Japanese way, I
Hmm.
don't know how well that would go over with
Right. It's hard to
your
say.
kids.
That you might not stand out very much if you. So he says, next he went to Tokyo. I was determined not to get involved in the hierarchical, laminated structure of oppressive and selfish faction schools and organizations. Fighting and combat rely on my own abilities. I believe that these faction styles of martial arts were just exploiting and deceiving others. They just relied on their old grandmaster, teacher, and school reputation. Depending on the style of martial arts passed down, is just relying on others. It's deceiving others and yourself. And this is a big part of his philosophy of leaving behind the oppressive and rigid school traditions and really just digging into what works for fighting and combat based on each individual's abilities and preferences. And so, I'm sure this has been a problem in martial arts for 1,000 years of relying on the reputation. If your grandmaster kicked a bunch of ass, then you could always just ride on that as part of your school's reputation and sort of try to get away with that. But I think you found in Japan that people were willing to test that and wouldn't rely just on face and reputation alone.
I think for him it was trying to get away from the um, commercialization, if you will, of martial arts in Taiwan and going to Japan and basically finding out that they were doing the same shit, and um, yeah, so that kind of thing pushed him to just keep looking other places too, and just keep exploring, which is, that's how you grow, I think. It's
Right?
not just get stuck in one thing.
Right. Okay, so the next action that takes place is there's a commemoration at the 25th anniversary commemoration of the Okinawan Goju-Ryu karate school. One of the masters performed and got into a dispute due to a question from Master Hung Yishang. So it sounded like the Japanese and Chinese martial arts had a clash of like, hey, we don't do it that way. Well, why not? And so Master Hong directed Sudong Chen to do freestyle sparring on the spot against these guys. So Sudong Chen had to engage in free sparring with the fifth degree black belt instructors. But luckily, he won 2 matches in a row, pacifying the teacher's dispute. However, in front of more than 150 black belt instructors from around the world, the fifth degree black belt instructors from the headquarters were defeated by a 25-year-old martial artist. Sudong Chen said, I thought to myself, this is not good, as one by one they would be beaten up or injured. However, Japanese martial arts have the concept of Budo moral virtue, being willing to accept defeat and not clinging stubbornly like Chinese martial arts, which can't afford to lose and still continue fighting. So my interpretation of this is that he had to fight these guys on stage, spur the moment at this event, and put on the spot at 25 years old, fighting these big, strong masters of fifth degree black belts in karate, which is no joke. And he got the wins, but then he looked out at a crowd of 150 black belt dudes. Like, it seems kind of impressed that the Japanese martial artists were willing to take the loss and be like, okay, wow, we got defeated. How can we learn from this? Rather than, he said, the Chinese would be like, any loss of face like that would cause them to freak out, and not take it very well. So
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying earlier. Is I think they have a bit more of that, like, I don't know, it's built into the culture that losing is part of how you um that's how you find people who are better than you, right? Where if there's always this thing of just giving up or giving in or letting the teacher off the hook at the last second because you don't want to embarrass them or whatever, that you don't really get to find out what what's real and what's just um people going along with it, right?
yeah. Okay, so to continue where we left off. So Sudong Chen says the next day, the director of the event called out, Junsu, which I guess is his nickname in Japan, come forward. I thought to myself, I better stand up straight. The director took out a red envelope to reward me. And I was surprised and didn't know how to respond, so I loudly said, I dare not accept the reward. The director said, if I tell you to take it, then take it. So I went forward to receive the red envelope. He then said, Junsu, do you know why I want to reward you? I replied, I'm not sure. Please enlighten me, teacher. Everyone, I am not rewarding Junsu for how well or how poorly he fought. Victory and defeat are common in warfare. I am rewarding him for his attitude, for protecting his teacher. Junsu, how old are you? 25 years old. 25 years old? Isn't it scary to fight in front of so many people? Yes, it is scary. This statement caused laughter, and the director also smiled and said, you're quite honest. Even if you're scared, you still have to fight. All right, return to the team. Sudong Chen said, the battle had allowed me to personally experience the moral character of Japanese martial arts. I received a reward of 60,000 yen in a red envelope. It's truly incredible. Such a thing would never happen in Taiwan or China. There, they talk about warriors' ethics all the time, but there's no spirit of sports in their words. They can't afford to lose face. They're a gang of liars. Of course, this is not about the quality of martial arts or martial ethics, but the problem of individual character. A true gentleman has principles when it comes to acquiring wealth. So yeah, this one's interesting. And
Make
again,
that money.
yeah, I mean, when it came to the cash, he was blown away that the Japanese respected him for beating them on stage in front of everybody and embarrassing them, but yet they appreciated that this young guy showed them something and gave him a great reward. And he's just like, damn, Chinese martial arts sucks. They would never do this. If you beat somebody then in Chinese Kung Fu, they'd never like reward you and applaud you like that. They'd be like, kick his hat or like gang up on you and beat you up or something.
That's why I think, again, Japan had more of the like sport
Yeah, he calls it
martial
sports
art.
mentality. Yeah.
I think that's why, for example, jujitsu, right, has always had, not always, but for the last 70 years or so, has moved towards the idea of being a sport,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Because
not,
that's how
not to
if you
say that
fight
it's
over
not
and
also,
over, you can grow from that, right?
yeah, it's not to say it's not also, an effective street fighting martial art or whatever, but it's that they understood, I think, that, if you want your art to spread, the best way to do it is through sports.
Totally.
And if you want to make money, the best way to do it is through sports.
Right. I mean, I think there's advantages to both approaches, but I think there's the sports approach. Like if your technique doesn't work, it gets discarded and you take on the ones that do work. And then, but I think they also run across something that traditional arts have discovered, which is that the stuff you threw out eventually ends up being the innovation that defeats the stuff that's currently winning. So I don't know, like if knee locks are out of fashion, then somebody brings them back and starts winning with it. So then everyone starts using it. And then something else gets thrown, so it all sort of circles around itself in the long run, which is how you end up with traditional martial arts over hundreds of years of testing. You settle on some stuff, but then it can get stagnant, is the danger there. So I think both have
Well,
their
yeah,
approaches.
and I think this is why things like Rosho, it's got an element of sport to it, but the it's cooperative, but there's also a piece about testing yourself. One of the differences between a sport and a martial, and a fight, right, is a sport starts from, ding, right? You have a an official, okay, the fight has started, right? So both guys know, okay, the fight started, right? And generally you also have a referee, which is creates a whole different thing too. But you don't have that element of being surprised in the same way because it's not, you're just talking to someone in a bar and all of a sudden they clock you. And so I think that kind of, again, it makes it more, it levels the playing field so that you can really find out who's better at the sport, right? And that makes it easier to bet on, right? Because it's not really, I think when it comes down to it, sports are mostly about making money and not really about, you know, any sort of moral thing or you know, trying to advance the world of martial arts or anything like that. I mean, that may be a side effect of it, but the primary reason people created sport martial arts was because they realized, oh, people will pay to watch this, and this goes back to the Greeks. They understood that, like, human beings like to watch other human beings bash on each other. And so, if and martial arts just makes it more interesting to watch, I think.
And there's the other aspect of it too, of the you can fight another day. So that's, I think, what Sue is pointing out here, that like if you enter into it with that sport mentality of if I lose to someone better, that'll make me better, therefore I'll be better next time. And
Yeah,
you don't have to take on this whole I'm fighting for the honor of my school and I can't afford to lose, which
right.
might stunt your growth if taken to an extreme.
Well, you'd be afraid to do it, right? I mean,
Right, which leads you to the Aikido syndrome where you can't ever engage in anything because you can't ever afford to lose because you've
right.
never tested it ever. So,
Yeah,
that
I
can
mean,
slow you
I guess
down.
you could go to the other extreme, which is, you don't want to have it be where every time you do it, it's life and death either,
Right.
because,
No, that wouldn't be
that
too healthy.
kind of fuck you up mentally,
That's some
probably.
serious like samurai old school of sword
Yeah,
fighting of like,
right.
oh, if I
So, I
lose,
mean,
I'm dead.
I mean, this is another little plug for Rosho in the sense that, I mean, any kind of wrestling really, like, but, I mean, even take like, college wrestling, right? They start from a position, right? They have a set, like judo or whatever. You both guys agree, like, okay, this is where we're going to start. And Rosho has that, and Push Hands has that, and I think what that allows you to do again is just kind of make it about the technique of the art, not necessarily just who can win. And because fighting's just about winning. It's not about learning something, or I mean, you might learn something along the way, but in a true, like, you just walking down the street and somebody runs up and clocks you, you're not thinking about, oh, I have to defend the honor of my school. You're thinking about, I have to survive this. And it's like, so I don't know. I mean, I think it's, again, his thing about being able to step outside of that um traditional mentality.
Yeah. So he says that Um,
Because hold on, because this is like 30, 40 years ago, right? So this is way before anybody had this idea. Because I think now we talk about these things and it sounds normal, right? But like it wasn't normal back then to break these kind of norms. So that was just a big deal.
so the story ends when my prize money of 60,000 yen was naturally taken by my teacher, juxtaposing the director, Mr. Miyazato's spirit of seeking practical martial arts with the contrast with my Taiwanese teacher's materialistic behavior. My teacher abandoned the essence of the martial art, while the Japan dojo had valued nurturing talent and sharing knowledge over material wealth.
Ouch.
I am grateful to the director of the institute for teaching me about the role of the teacher, and I cherish his teachings. So damn, he slams Hung Yishang for taking his money out of his hand. So I can just picture the guy handing the red envelope to Sudong Chen, and then Hung Yishang like plucking it out of his hand, and said, "Up, oh, that's the master's
There it
money."
is. Another martial art relationship ruined by by monetary
Right?
greed.
Yeah. And I mean, and Sudong Chen blames that on Taiwan, Chinese martial culture for being
Right.
materialistic like that.
General or
And
whatever, yeah.
I'm sure it goes on both sides. I'm sure there's people who will critique Japanese martial arts too, but I think he did, Sue experienced something different here, and it was a real eye opener of like, wow, these Japanese guys really want good martial arts no matter what it takes. And he got a very bad taste in his mouth for the master disciple, you give me your money relationship that he experienced in Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, I think being so young,
Yeah,
probably he probably just
yeah, that must
he
have
probably
cut,
got
dude.
burned a whole bunch of times.
Right.
And, it was just like, oh, this, and then I
You
think
get
it
hazed
sounds,
pretty hard when you're
yeah, and
young.
it sounds like the Japanese guy was kinder to him, at least on that level. And
Right.
that left an impression of like, hey, maybe there's another way to do this. Because I mean,
Yeah.
he'd been doing, he'd been in that world since he was like 14 or 15, right? I mean, so that's your formative years in a sense,
Yeah.
right? And if you're from 15 to 25, like totally immersed in something like that, I can kind of again create sort of a
Yeah.
sheltered bubble.
Yeah, and I remember when we were reading about Master Hong's dojo back in Taiwan, where there's 300 guys training there, big, big, strong foreigner GIs, mean ass Chinese martial artists who've been training their whole lives. And here comes Sudong Chen, who's like 5 foot something, as a young teen comes in here, and they're just kicking his ass and cruelly beating him up until he got good enough to start kicking their ass. So like it's just rife with opportunities to leave a bad feeling from that experience. And then he leaves his hometown and goes to this new place where they're treating him with all kinds of respect and give him a bunch of money for winning. He's like, damn, I could go for this. This is a lot
Right.
better. Like, and then to top it off, his teacher just takes the money right out of his hand. He's like, fuck this, man.
Yeah, well, that last part would probably cement a pretty bad feeling,
Right.
just toward
That would leave
personally,
a
nothing else.
yeah, I can only imagine that they didn't get along great after that. So he says, in Japan and in the West, I encountered nearly 100 other karate disciplines, such as Goju-Ryu, Shotokan, Kyokushin, and so on, and I've engaged them all in combat. It is a personal research journey, not to be compared to those Chinese who always state how great and invincible Chinese martial arts are. For them, Chinese martial arts is just masters of the past, like Huo Yuanjia, Wang Feihong, Ip Man, etc. For me, I'm of the Pingpu Taiwanese plains and Yamato ethnicity, and I do not get myself involved with that kind of stuff. So I think so. What he's saying
Yeah,
there is, I'm not actually Chinese. I'm a native Taiwanese, and Yamamoto is Japanese. So like,
right.
I'm half Taiwanese, half Japanese. I'm not even Chinese. So screw them and their uptight mentality towards worshiping the past
Right.
masters.
Well, and again, this is where I think, guy probably got mistreated for
Yeah,
lots of reasons, but
hell
one of
yeah,
them sounds like it was just because he
racism.
wasn't, it was racism essentially. And
Totally, man.
um,
Because I think Taiwanese and native ethnicities were not well respected among the newcomer Chinese from 1949. At that time, it was a very harsh environment for Taiwanese people. So I can only imagine that. And I know
Yeah,
Hung
and
Yishang
I
himself
mean,
suffered from that kind of criticism. So,
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's
and to be half Japanese after World War II was probably not
right. I was just gonna say that
easy to be,
hard to fit in anywhere, really, right?
right?
Like
Because I
it's
mean,
just
how did you fit in Japan either? They're looking
right.
at you as half Taiwanese. They figure you're Chinese, so like,
Right. So the Japanese
ugh.
are, don't want you. The Taiwanese look down on you. The Chinese are like, no, thank you. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally get the feeling of trying to find a home, and trying to find a place where you're treated with respect. Yeah.
Mm,
Because that's all anybody really wants, right? I mean, in any field is just to be, valued and, whatever for your worth and not seen as an interloper, right? Or whatever. That sort of thing of like acceptance into a group is mostly, why people get into doing a certain thing is they see something in the people that do it and they want to be part of that, and um again, I mean, I think there is a piece of it. I mean, I know, for me personally, like I started when I was 17 and I had all kinds of, weird fantasies about what martial arts were. And I definitely bought into the, Chinese martial arts are the best martial arts. But I think you have to do that. I think whatever martial art you do, when you start, you have
yeah,
to say to yourself, okay, this is the best one because
right.
you need to motivate yourself, right? This is
Hmm.
where that, the if you're sitting there going, oh man, this sucks. I shouldn't,
Right.
like
Well, then
that's not,
don't do it.
yeah,
But that was like the
completely
arrogance of youth that he said,
right.
look, if you're not a hot-headed idiot when you're young,
That's
that
yeah,
why bother, you know?
and I think that's kind of what he was saying is like they made me do things
Yeah.
that weren't practical.
Yeah.
And I was forced to do a lot of things that were just traditional, but when it really came down to it, they weren't practical, and I can see where that.
Well, he writes a little bit more about that here and says traditional martial arts that do not involve kicking, punching, throwing, or grappling in freestyle are just forms of folk craft and tradition. Whereas combat sports without a defensive system to train for self-defense, those are just forms of aggressive violence. So like he said, if you don't spar and you just do sort of martial arts forms and stuff, that's just a folk dancing basically. But combat sports that don't train you for real street violence and stuff like that, well, those are just aggressive violence where the big beats up the small basically. So I
Mhm.
think he's critiquing both sides there. And he says to him, martial arts involves the application of techniques in both offensive and defensive aspects, including the use of punches, kicks, and weapons. So to him, it's all about absolute usage in life or death. And neither folk dancing nor combat sports can give you that completely. You need to combine all that stuff basically and create your own system that works for you. Is kind of his philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, this is where all sort of Steel Frank's thing about there's fighting arts, martial arts, and sport fighting, right? That combat fighting is different from sport fighting is different from martial arts, right? Martial arts is this sort of all-encompassing thing where you're trying to learn the cultural bit, the historical bit, the martial application, the health app, you're just going for the whole package, right?
Hmm.
When you're talking about fighting either for combat or for sports, you've narrowed your focus down to something that's pretty specific, right? I mean, you have a very set goal of, okay, I'm doing this for this purpose, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can throw out if that's your purpose, because a lot of stuff doesn't have anything to do with that, right? And that's where I think, um, again, just this idea of getting rid of a lot of the sort of the routines that don't really have an application, and
Right.
I 100% agree with them that that there's a lot of stuff that's very like it's cool and it's like I'm glad somebody knows it so it doesn't disappear. But I also recognize that, for my purposes and for most people's purposes, it's not necessary, right? To really benefit from these arts, you don't need to know every little piece about all of it. You just need to know the parts that will actually benefit you, right? And it again, I mean, so there's a trimming down when you decide, okay, this is the purpose, rather than I want to know the whole, thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's enough for now, I think.
All right. Hey, folks, thanks for listening. Just want to remind you to check out the Facebook page and the Instagram for images to go along with the episode. And don't forget to head over to the Patreon to hear the bonus episode to go along with this episode. We also have some interviews. Coming up, Jess is going to be doing a review or a recap of his trip to China, both to Beijing and to Wudong Mountains. So you might want to join and you can check that out. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.